Welcome to EPG Pathshala on History and Ideologies of Social Work. My name is Murli Desai. I'm a former professor of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. For this course on History and Ideologies of Social Work, Conceptual Framework, which is the first module, is what we will discuss today. Now, what are we going to do within this module? We will look at each of these concepts, which is history, social change, ideology, and social work profession, and how they are all linked together. Now, what is history? History, often we've heard about kings and monarchies and then wars and who then took over, etc. Here, we are looking at history of social change. And for that, the historical context is going to be context of social, economic, political nature, and how that context is important to understand the ideologies of that particular period, and how that affects the ideology of social work profession. Now, these three things together, the context, the ideology, and social work profession, together create a paradigm of social work profession. And when the context and ideology change, then the paradigm of social work profession changes. We will see how. Now, as we discussed, history is a discipline that studies a chronological record of events based on critical examination of source materials. Now, historical sources of materials are fragmented and incomplete. So history is really a discipline that kind of reconstructs what would have happened based on those fragmented and incomplete sources. So it has those limitations. Social change in the broadest sense is a change in societal structure and social relations. History of social change is change of these social structures in the socio-cultural, political and economic context of events. Generally, history is divided into prehistorical, ancient, medieval, and modern period, and what is the so-called postmodern period of contemporary times. Now, what has helped to understand history of social change is Marx's theory of historical materialism. Now, what is this theory? According to Marx, in every stage, the social systems correspond to the mode of production. Now, how does he bring about that link? Each social system, according to him, contains a ruling class which has depended on the economic surplus. We'll see how that happens in each stage. The dominant ideology of that ruling class, it becomes a dominant ideology that is creating or regulating the social relationship, the social structures. Now, over a long period of time, when the mode of production changes, these domination and the groups that dominate change, their ideologies change, and so social structure also changes. And these change don't come about as gradually as they were existing. They come about through conflicts. They come about through revolutions. And once the rising class had defeated the ruling class, it sets about transforming the societal structure with a new mode of production. Let's see how that happens now. According to this theory, if we can look at these four different stages according to mode of production. The prehistorical period, as we are aware, the mode of production was hunting and gathering. There was no agriculture, there was no industry, right? Now, so that hunting and gathering phase of the prehistorical period is the first stage that we will look at. Then agriculture and horticulture phase during the ancient and the medieval periods. So this is how we are linking Marx's materialism of stages by production, mode of production, to the classical historical stages of prehistorical, ancient, medieval and modern. Now, industrialization brought about the modern period. And what today is known as the post-industrialization of the postmodern period. Okay, now what happened in the prehistorical period and prehistorical communities? Now here I want to clarify one thing, that we are not only talking about history in a linear sense, because prehistorical communities exist even today. The world is so diverse that you will find all these phases, even dominantly agricultural communities exist today. We all know that. So we cannot say that now these earlier stages are over. Now we are only in the postmodern stage. So this prehistorical communities, the mode of production, as I said earlier, was or is hunting and gathering, for which people had to join efforts. It was not one individual's work. It was not one family's work. The whole community joined efforts in this phase for this mode of production. And when it was just enough to survive, they would share them equally. For example, if they hunted an animal and which was just enough for the whole community to survive for today, tomorrow again they had to go back to hunt. Now at this time, when it was only enough for today, they were evenly distributed among the tribal members. Now tribal is the societal structure of this prehistorical community. Now what were the other significant aspects of this community? The tribal chief was selected because of his hunting skills, because hunting was an important mode of production. There was no inheritance of power which came later in the monarchies. So even the shamans, the medicine men, were appointed as such because of certain skills that they had. So there was a hierarchy with reference to the tribal chief and the shamans, but these were not based on, they were not inherited, but they were based on merits. Okay, so this is the prehistorical social structure based on the mode of production. We'll move to the next stage now, which is agriculture and horticulture period. Now agriculture and horticulture developed during the ancient period. It led to surplus of products because they could have produced more than they could eat for today. They were not, sowing and getting grains just for today. There was surplus. Now this surplus kind of broke down the clans into families. It didn't need the whole community to work for it. So family started becoming the unit, the economic unit, and therefore also the societal unit. Now, because at the family level also they needed labor, because there was a lot of labor that was needed in the fields for the agricultural production. So two things happened. One is they didn't have to go on hunting and gathering, so move from place to place. If all the trees and all the produce that they've gathered were over in one area, they moved to another, for example. Now they settled down because agriculture needed land-based production. So they settled down, housing became important, there were permanent settlements, plus they needed labor, as I said earlier. And this gave rise to the practice of slavery and later feudalism. Historians say that slavery probably preceded feudalism. And there are lots of evidences that they quote about that. This started institutionalizing of inequality. How did slavery happen? People who were either became slaves because of wars that they lost, or they became slaves when they were weak in one way or the other. Slavery kind of became a bondage which had a reason, okay, which led to that inequality. But slavery was like, your whole life was dedicated to your owner. You didn't have your own identity, own choices, nothing. Every minute, every second of your life was to be lived according to your owner's wishes. And how was feudalism different? Feudalism had, again, land-based structure where there were landlords. Feudalism, interestingly, came about wherever it was strong, especially in Europe. It came about when kings were weak. Monarchies, kingdoms have been prevalent as a dominant political ruling structure almost all over the world for a long period of time. But the kings have been sometimes strong, sometimes weak. So when Europe was going through weak kingdoms, when Roman Empire broke down, is when feudalism started getting stronger. Now, what are feudal lords? Feudal lords they're actually landowners owning huge pieces of land. These were landlords, and because of their land plus the army, they had their own personal what they call knights. Okay, their own armies which were independent of the kings. Now these made the feudal lords very, very strong, and very often stronger than the kings, and also stronger than the Catholic Church, which was, or let's say, church of different denominations in Europe at that time. Now in feudal systems, again, labor was important because there was huge land. So there were serfs who worked on the lands. How were they different from the slaves? The serfs could marry, serfs could have their own families, and they also had their own small pieces of land. However, their priority was to cater to the land needs of the feudal lords. Only after that was done, they could go back to their own land and produce whatever they wanted to on their own lands. Another limitation of the serfs was that they could not leave their land. Sometimes the feudal lords would sell their land to another feudal lord, but the land gets sold with the serfs. So if the serf decides, I don't want to work on this land for this feudal lord, I want to go to the other feudal lord who is better, he cannot, or she cannot, because women were part of the serf families. They could not leave the land. They were tied to the land. So it may sound that feudalism was less unequal than slavery, but when you see the actual day-to-day choice of either producing their own produce or leaving or anything else, they did not have any freedom. So again, inequality got aggravated in a different form. Okay. Then what monarchies were doing, and the churches, because they needed the resources that the feudal lords had, they supported the feudal lords. And so the power got centralized into the feudal lords. Okay, let's see now the next mode of production, which is industrialization. Now, as we all know, we are more familiar with this phase, which is relatively a recent history, that when agricultural mode of production moved to the industrial mode of production in the modern period, the industries also needed labor, but the labor was tied to the land. So what does one do? Now, the control of the feudal lords and monarchies therefore had to be challenged. Only then the serfs could achieve freedom from the land in order to then join the industries. Now, who were these people who wanted to challenge feudal lords and monarchies? There was an emerging middle class. As we saw earlier, the societal structure basically comprised of royal family, church, feudal lords and serfs. There was no middle class. Okay? Now there was a middle class emerging. Okay? Now this middle class was that of traders. This middle class was that of those who were getting into science. A lot of things happened during the modern period, which we'll go into detail later on. And so this rising middle class is what challenged the feudal lords through several revolutions in different parts of Europe as well as United States. Now, what was the societal structure that resulted from these revolutions? Industrialization came to be, capitalism came to be, which went hand to hand with industrialization. The whole societal structure turned into capitalists who owned the capital, who owned the industries. Then you had the middle class, the traders, basically, and you had the labor, which worked in the industries. So the whole class system, the societal structure, therefore, changed. Now, what is the status of the labor at that time? Why are we looking at slaves, serfs, and labor with such focus? We want to see the link of these modes of production to inequality, and therefore the context in which social work profession came about and the objectives of social work profession. Now, the labor in the industries, again, if we compare with the serfs and the slaves, how are they different? On the surface, the labor was free. Labor was not tied to the land. The labor could also leave the industry that he was employed in. He could go to another industry. So again, on the surface, it looks that labor had more freedom than the serfs. But the labor did not have the freedom of moving up the economic ladder. The labor at the most moved from one industry to the other, but continued his status as the laborer. Another important aspect to understand this societal structure was that the capitalists also went by the ideology of liberalism, which proclaimed that there's freedom for everyone. For example, there's freedom for the laborer to start an industry, but the laborer should have that capability. So, under the name of freedom, it again gave an impression of a more egalitarian society. However, how does the labor get that capability? Because to start with, you are deprived of the resources, and therefore you are deprived of the opportunities to get those capabilities. So again, we see that laborers again remain in that unequal society, deprived, and supposedly all the more a hidden inequality, because they are told you are free to do what you like, but there is in fact no such freedom. Now, post-industrialization, what happened? When industrial revolution, or rather not post-industrialization, but when industrial revolution got aggressive and colonization took place of African and Asian countries, this whole mode of production got spread all over the world, industrialization, and all its implications got spread. And when we talk about globalization and post-industrialization, how again the whole societal structure changes, we will see in details when we talk about that topic later on. So this is how historical materialism helped us to understand the socio-economic political context, mode of production, and linkages to development of inequalities. Now, ideology plays an important role to justify the societal structures throughout history. Now, let's see what is ideology. This course was earlier called History and Philosophy of Social Work. Now it has been changed, or now since 1990s, it has been changed to History and Ideologies of Social Work. Is there a difference? Is philosophy more appropriate for social work, or is ideology more appropriate? Let's see what philosophy means. Philosophy is a discipline that talks about the mysteries of existence and reality. It discovers the nature of truth, knowledge, what are the basic values, relationship between humanity and nature, and so on. It is divided into 5 branches such as metaphysics, epistemology, logic, ethics, and aesthetics. On the other hand, ideology is more or less a coherent set of ideas that provides a basis for organized political action. But this is intended to preserve, modify, or overthrow the existing system of power. Ideology is therefore generally political, and it is the ideology which has brought about social changes and not philosophy. All ideologies have the following features, such as they offer an account of the existing order, usually in the form of a worldview. If we take an example of, let's say, the contemporary ideology of feminism, we'll go to the historical ideologies in those topics. But just to understand the features of ideologies, let's take the example of feminism. Okay, feminism provides a worldview of why women are subordinated, which systems subordinate women, okay? So it's an account of the existing order and what's wrong with it. They advance a model of a desired future. Feminism advances a model of how women can achieve more equality and equity and how that would be good for a society. They explain how political change can and should be brought about, how to get from the existing order to a desired future. One very important propaganda of feminism, or the tool that feminism uses to create awareness, is the whole theme of personal is political. Okay, so instead of saying feminism only applies to women at family level, it's widespread, and this is how they see that the whole new ideology can influence the whole society. Other features of ideologies are it has a powerful emotional affective character. One talks to a feminist, or if one talks more in a sexist manner or a patriarchal manner, feminists are not going to say that is wrong. They're going to get agitated. There's an emotional aspect to the ideology because it's intolerable to hear these kind of statements. There's also inevitability of choice and its urgency. A feminist will not say, I'm also not feminist, I'm also a feminist, or, I also believe in this. But there is still an inevitability of choice and an urgency that, no, this has to stop, this has to be done. It makes people reject all other systems concerned in the same content. And it leads to development or changes in the paradigms of society and as well as social work. As this course focuses on understanding the social context of the social work profession and its changing paradigms, ideologies are found to be more relevant to the course rather than philosophies. And the construct of ideology that we will discuss throughout the course is how this particular ideology perceives people and the social problems. Again, we took the example of feminism, how they perceive men, women, and why women are subordinated, the ideals and the ethics. Also, every ideology has arisen out of critique of the previous dominant ideology. So that also becomes part of understanding an ideology. What is the critique that they are offering? So that the new ideology is considered to be more important. Okay, now let's move ahead. Types of ideologies. Generally, we find ideologies that are religious, ideologies that are secular. Now, religious ideologies, why do we call them ideologies? Not everyone would agree that you can use the term religious ideology. They can be religions, religious philosophies, or some people do use the word religious ideologies. If we look at the concept of ideology, we will understand why. This term makes a relevant connection to this particular course. Ideology originated in the religious questions, such as nature, life, purpose of life and death, and creator, and relation between human beings and the creators, and so on. Then further, every religion looks at these particular aspects of God or creation. Again, we already talked about that. The spirit, what happens to the body and soul after death, and so on, and provides a major source of ethics, morality, ideology, etc. It's the last point that we have here on the slide, which is most human beings are partisan with reference to religion. In the sense, they believe that only their own religion, and they do not accept any truth of any other religion. Does it sound familiar to ideology? That there is an emotional content and there is inevitability of choice. If I am a Hindu or a Christian or a Muslim, I believe that is the truth. And I don't believe in any other religion most of the time. Okay. Before that, as we will see through the course, the religions of the world broadly are divided into two well-defined groups: the Eastern religions and the Judeo-Christian religions. The Eastern religions generally owe their origin either to India or are profoundly influenced by the Indian religious thought. And Judeo-Christian religions generally have, or rather all of them, like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, have their origin in Judaism. And the thoughts are also going along a different kind of a paradigm in these two streams. Now let us look at the secular ideologies that affect the socio-economic and political aspects of society. We saw the Renaissance, or we will see in detail when we come to that topic, the Renaissance developed at the end of the medieval period and formed a transition between medieval and the modern periods. Now, it's this Renaissance that brought about these secular ideologies, because till then, religion dominated the West. Christianity dominated as the source of ideologies of philosophy in the West. Secular humanism came about to replace religion as a dominant ideology as an outcome of the Renaissance. And therefore, a string of ideologies that were rising over a period of time. Now, these modern secular ideologies, which are today called the classical ideologies, they comprise secular humanism, rationalism, social Darwinism, liberalism, capitalism, democracy, and so on and so forth. We'll go into details later. Then we have a whole another set of contemporary ideologies, also known as the new ideologies, that try to counter the social inequality. And these are ideologies that began after more or less the World War, Second World War. And these comprise ideologies like social justice, human rights, neo-colonialism, neoliberalism, post-democracy, critical theory, feminism, ecologism, multiculturalism, and so on. These ideologies brought about a change in the paradigm of social work profession. Now let's see how all these fit into the social work profession, how social work profession came about. Now all these religions have promoted charity. Besides charity, liberalism promoted freedom, welfare and socialism brought about the concepts of equality. Religious and secular ideologies, therefore, with all these values, influence social work profession. And what is a profession? A profession is a public pronouncement or avowal of a belief or a promise. Let's see what this promise is. This promise is based on three particular dimensions. One is knowledge. It is based on knowledge. Two is doing. It's not a profession where, it's not a discipline like philosophy or sociology where you are just studying. It's doing that is important. And the third dimension is helping. Doing what? It's not just doing, bringing about some kind of newer products, but helping others, helping the society. Thus, the Western modern ideologies have led to requirements of a profession, such as social work, as follows. Secular humanism brought about secularization of help. Profession is not similar to help that was provided by religions. It's secular help. Importance of scientific knowledge, formal, and therefore formal education. How do you impart knowledge? You need education for that. And specialization. So, what have we learned today in this course? We have looked at the concept of history and social change. We've seen historical stages where inequality was getting institutionalized. We also saw what is ideology that is so important to bring about these social changes over a period of time. We saw religious versus secular ideologies. We also saw how philosophy and ideologies are different. And we also saw how the classical ideologies and the contemporary ideologies are different, and how all these have influenced social work paradigms, and what are the key aspects of social work paradigms which have not changed. The paradigms will change, we will see that later, but the three aspects of knowing, doing, and helping are core aspects of social work profession. Thank you very much. Now, I hope you have enjoyed this session, you have understood these basic concepts for the course. And for further clarification, what I suggest is, instead of any one particular source or two sources, because these are so many aspects of history and society put in a brief conceptual framework. Any particular concept that you find difficult, see the reference, go back to it, try to understand it more. And I hope you enjoy doing this particular linkages of different concepts and see it in today's reality. Thank you.